Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Timsok TS-316. So these are a loaner pair from a guy on Discord. Very, very nice guy. His name is Grizzly. Very good set of ears. Very knowledgeable. He picked these up right after CanJam, and I understand exactly why he did that. And I don't really want to pick them up because they are kind of mirror polished. They're fingerprint magnets, but they're absolutely beautiful to look at up close. But yeah, you just don't want to touch them and then show them on video because they have a really nice finish to them. I mean, really, really well done. Kind of what you would expect at $500, and maybe we'll kind of try to avoid picking them up too much here. But single dynamic driver, about $500 directly from Timsok. You can get it from Music Tech as well, and maybe a couple other places. But we'll sort of start with that story that I almost started with. So Grizzly shows up at CanJam. I think he's been on for the past couple of years. He runs through as many sets as he can, sort of reports back what was good, what was bad, a couple gems. And I think Timsok was one of the ones that kind of floated to the top, kind of blown away on his first impression of it, and then he pursued buying it right after the show. And I will say, I think in 1 minute of listening to it, I understood exactly why he bought it. Very, very great first impression. It's almost rare to hear a very full-bodied single dynamic driver done on a very nice dynamic driver. Usually you get, nice tuning on a driver that's okay, or you get a really nice driver and the tuning is a little off. I think the 316 is one of the kind of the rare ones that got both of them right, and you hear it kind of right away. And I almost forget worrying about the bass and the mids and the treble, the driver quality, the techs. All of that stuff is all there in a very cohesive way. It's still one dynamic driver, so if you're expecting, a tribrid level of detail, it doesn't quite do that. But, as far as a top-tier single dynamic driver, it's got all those things covered. And to be brutally honest, I just love the way it presents music around the space in your head. No need to skip tracks. It can do, pretty much any genre. It was my definition of an everyday style set. It would just kind of blow through a playlist, and you just put it on, forget that it's in your ears, and you can go all day just listening to it. It's got a very, very general, appealing, full-bodied sound, and I was kind of blown away about how good it actually does that sort of tuning, because you just don't run across it, as I said, on a really nice driver all that often. So is it perfect? No, it's kind of source picky, and different sources will throw it off balance. It's got a really tight balance to the tuning. It's got an upper treble airiness. It's got a little lift to it that, might not agree with your music, especially if you're into EDM. And if we take a look at the graph real quickly, and we'll look at it against a couple other single dynamic drivers. So Tangent Oxygen in the green, Dark Magician, you got the bass light version, about the Harman style Oxygen bass shelf, and then you got Timsok. Like I said, it is a very full sounding bass shelf. That is probably about 10 dB. And I would say it doesn't necessarily sound exactly like that 10 dB, but again, it's sort of unmistakable how full body it is, and I think they did that very, very well. And as we get through the mids and into the upper mids, you can kind of see they split out into different variations. So up top, you had Oxygen. People would say about the upper mids that energetic, how it hits female vocals, kind of a trademark sound of Oxygen, and I think it does that very well. Dark Magician is the low pin gain, smooth operator, very nice extension, so you can kind of see that at the bottom. And then Timsok kind of took almost a half and half approach. So they do a lowered pinna here, and then rise. Like I said, there's sort of an airiness, a kind of a boost to the upper treble that kind of rides a little bit higher than the others later. So I'll call this the later energy or rise later style. So it does lower, so almost no shout here, and then you put a little more energy into it as you go along later in the treble. So not quite. It's like almost 3 different style tunings, 3 different style sets, all very nice dynamic drivers. It's sort of it comes down to not so much which one is better, but which one is better for the library and how you like to listen and your preferences and all those things. So business in the front, kind of we'll do this mullet style. So again, like I said, top tier dynamic driver, one of those. It's kind of hard to tell that it's a dynamic driver if you just blindly listen to it, you'd be confused for a little bit. It just has the text and a very natural sound. It's got dynamics and it's got stage, and it's kind of warm, and that kind of gives it away as to what kind of set it is. It's a single dynamic driver, and it doesn't have any BA timbre, so you'll figure it out. But at first listen, it's not one of those where you immediately say, well, it doesn't have enough separation, or it doesn't really have any technical performance, and it's definitely dynamic driver. It'll take a little bit of thought to figure out what it is. Perhaps more relaxed than typical. Like I said, it doesn't have a really high pinna gain. If you're used to Harman style pinna gains, it's not that. And typically with a flat source, it definitely works a little bit better. A warm source will just make it warmer, and perhaps that'll be too warm. And I definitely liked it with a more flat source, not adding to the warmth that is already there. And it has this hear anything tuning, basically fully extended with black backgrounds at both sides. Nothing really sharp or muddy in the middle, just quiet, natural extension. And unless your source takes you there, it takes you off balance, there's really no bright spots or too much bass. That's some of the things I ran into with different sources. But this hear anything style, it's got, like I said, the sub bass looks like it rises, and you're thinking that there's going to be a big, huge sub bass presence at the end, and it's sort of not. It kind of sounds like it plateaus out more like oxygen. So you have a really nice depth to it, nice extension to the sub bass, but I wouldn't say that you notice a huge amount of sub bass out there at the very end. And almost the same thing on the treble. It's very nicely extended, but you don't notice that there's a big 15K over-energetic bright spot out there. It sort of trails off in a natural way. And again, that's kind of a rare thing to actually hear, where you can hear the sub bass and you can hear over. It doesn't take up the whole stage. It doesn't really have an overbearing presence, even though it looks like it's arced up. And then the same thing with the upper treble. To hear a dynamic driver that has extension and then arcs over, and you still have the 15K presence without it being over boosted, overhyped, or undershot where you can't hear it at all. To follow a natural arc of sort of level, it's actually not as common as you think it is. And to hear it done well, you just kind of, as I said, you forget about all these small details and just say it's all there covered. But the all bit of that is a lot of things that you normally just kind of take for granted, but then when you hear them done well, you're like, wow, this thing actually is kind of special in that way. So party in the back, so not quite bass head levels, right? It's about 10 dB, but yeah, it very much is a bigger bass set, and it has a lot of bass control, and that's why I said it doesn't necessarily sound like it has 10 dB out there in the sub bass, because it never really rises too far into the stage. It tends to sit a little lower, and it kind of works its way up through about mid through the stage, and it never really takes over the stage as you're expecting to if you just look at the graph. But it's definitely my favorite style, that sub bass extension, but where it doesn't rise all the way through the stage. There's never really a point where you can't hear beyond the bass and into the black background, but you still have a lot of body and a lot of decay, and it's just an open, airy sound in the bass side. Again, this is something that you just don't hear all the time, but when you hear it, it's sort of hard to figure out what's actually going on there. But definitely a source check if your source is adding too much to the sub bass and you're hearing a lot of it. Probably change your source, because it shouldn't really rise that far or have a huge presence right there out there like it graphs. So rank wise, Twilight versus Timsok. I have Twilight. This was my chance to hear Timsok. I'd still give Twilight the edge, and I think more people would like Timsok if you like more bass. If you just had them both on a table side by side and said pick the one that you like better, I think they're both one dynamic drivers. Twilight is a very, very nice set, but at some point you have to be honest with yourself and say, well, I either like more bass and that works well with my library, and I'll choose Timsok, or I like the cleanliness and the technical capabilities of Twilight, and you kind of go there. But it's really hard. Timsok is a very, very general appealing, nice warmth, and a very fun, track like Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. Once you hear the drums bang in the beginning, it's kind of hard to deny how well it sounds, how full it sounds, how big it sounds, how that impact sounds on Timsok, and then to say, yeah, but I'll take Twilight because it's more expensive or it's just cleaner. At some level, you can be more attracted to fun, and I think that I don't have any problem with people who would choose Timsok over Twilight for that simple reason. It's just more appealing to them on their preferences. So the bass, first you really can't use a warm source with it. It gets really kind of warm, and I would say I wouldn't really go there. It'll be too warm, and it'll sound a bit too off balance. Again, there's not a ton of treble boost to it. So if you add a little bit too much on the bass side, it becomes too warm. You're going to kind of miss a little bit in the upper side. So do make sure that the balance, like I said, there's kind of a source check here of it shouldn't sound all that warm to the point where the treble sounds a little bit short. So, but generally, I do like how the mid bass still has impact. It still has that fun, but you don't really hear that heavy hand in the sub bass. Like I said, it sounds like it rolls off a little bit, and it's just not a huge presence all the way out there, but that's kind of the way exactly it should sound. It gives the mid bass a nice sharp impact, and then you get all the depth from the sub bass. Definitely that combination of impact and controlled depth, it's just super appealing to me. And it's exactly what I complained about on EA500LM. So as soon as I heard this, and I had actually been listening to EA500LM right before this, as soon as I heard this, I'm like, that is exactly what I was talking about on LM. How this handles the bass and the sub bass, and how it doesn't take over or seem too present, exactly how LM should have been. And that's exactly why I complain about LM in that way. I want the bass to just sit low on the stage to hear over it, sound more open, but not so light, and it has no body. And they really nailed that style. And as I was talking about it with Twilight, when you're considering a $500 purchase, you really need to be honest with yourself on level. That lack of honesty is just going to end in sadness. If you really prefer all the bass and someone says that Twilight's a better set, but you prefer more bass on your library, you really got to be honest with yourself and say, well, that person has different preferences than I do, and I'll choose the one that has, more appealing to the library as I listen to it, versus some reviewer who doesn't know a whole lot and just says, oh yeah, Twilight's a better set. But no, be totally honest with yourself. And same on brightness. If you don't like bright things and someone tells you that EA500LM is the most amazing set ever, well, it's still bright, and if you still can't handle brightness, that's not really going to be a good match for you. So the mids, this is really another set with a really nice vocal focus. And I usually shy away from things that are a little too forward vocals. But again, the whole presentation on the stage, where things are as you're listening to it, it just works for me here in a way that I don't hear on too many sets. And that's why I say I tend to avoid it, because it's usually not done all that well. Some volume play to make sure it sounds transparent, and the treble might grab you on EDM. Like I said, there's a little bit of upper bit there that'll sort of grab you when you don't expect it on some electronic music. I definitely tended to raise and lower the volume quite a bit so it sounded at its best. Kind of another set where there's just a lot of kind of resolution right there in the mids, and if it's a little bit too low, you're like, maybe I'll just click it once to the right and it'll sound even better. And that's exactly what happens on this one. And sometimes you hit EDM and you're like, I'll click it back to the left once. But I tended to play a lot with the volume just so I could hear everything at its best on this set, and I don't, it's not really a complaint, but it was just something I noticed a lot on this set. I just tended to have my hand on the volume quite a bit. And again, it's a one dynamic driver, so super resolution or a detailed B set, it's not really that. Its strength is in that smoother, more natural, not over boosted, not over hyped. Focus on the vocals, no problems hearing on both ends. Just a very smooth end-to-end presentation. People who like dynamic drivers, they like that, more natural when tuned well, and that's kind of what they did here. If your source is a little bit more mid-forward, again, bad things are going to happen because it's a little bit more mid-forward. If your source is a little bit mid-forward, the whole thing is going to sound a little bit too mid-forward. On a treble, again, another set where you really need a resolving source to hear everything, because they didn't overboost it, it's not overhyped, there's no huge boost out there. So if your source tends to roll it off a little bit, if you tend to listen at a lower volume and the SPL isn't quite there, it's going to be a little bit harder to hear. So you definitely need to pair the source to what it can do in its natural state. And I think that's just something I noticed on this one. It really does respond really well to a very resolving source. And as I said, there's kind of an unexpected lift to the treble in that upper bit. I didn't really expect it. And you don't really notice it a whole lot until you hit some music that hits it. Then you're like, oh, okay. You look at the graph and it's like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But definitely one of the better later energy sets, as I talked about. Less shout, so they brought down the pinna. They raised some of the later volume, energy in the treble. But you know, it'll be a tense occasionally, especially on EDM. They really put some thought into how to get that treble to extend and avoid it sounding dark, right? It's as I said, you've got 3 different variations, and they went through this low pinna and then raised the energy out here, so it sort of gently floats above kind of where Harmon is. Not all that typical. Typically, someone would, you know, raise this as well, so you end up with a lot of shout and a lot of energy out there. Or they would dip this off a little bit harder, and then you would end up with not as much extension, not as much airiness. And Timsok kind of took a different approach, and I think it actually worked out pretty well here in the treble region. So stage, you know, the first time I put them on, I thought the stage could be bigger. It's not a huge stage, but then, you know, maybe it could be, the vocals could have been pushed back. Like I said, it's a little bit vocal forward. It would have been good if those were pushed back a little bit. Maybe the stage would have sounded deeper. And then I just couldn't stop listening to it. So I kind of figured out that maybe I won't complain about that too much, because I think it actually does work. I think, as I said, you sort of forget about everything that is going on, whether the stage is too narrow, not high enough, not wide enough. And you just listen to it as it is and enjoy it. And that's kind of where I got to. I would much rather listen to it than review it. It's a very, very nice set. Very, very appealing to me in my library. So yeah, I understand 100% why he bought it right away. So I can't fault him for that move. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.